So I'm going to paraphrase this because I usually don't do it. So God so loved the world that he gave his only son. There's a way to think about this that is metaphysical. So we say in New Thought that there is only one. That one is God, or source, or spirit, or universe, or life. And it so desired to experience itself as this world that we're here to experience this world. And the funny thing about experiencing this world is that it often feels a little less than joyful. Perhaps a little challenging. Perhaps even despairing. That anything might change for the better. I don't know about anybody else, but I have had dark nights of the soul in my life in which I looked around the world, and this is after many years of spiritual practice and many years of prayer and many years of learning to understand the still small voice in me, and said, how in the world can we change this? How in the world does what I am doing personally impact the whole thing where so much sorrow and pain is apparent? And in those moments I despaired. See, today's talk is called Love Works. And what it's about is we are always at a point and a choice of how we are going to address the life that we are living. There are only two basic motivations in life. It can be boiled down to that and all of the variations of those two motivations. We are either working from fear or we are working from love. Now, fear has a whole bunch of ramifications: envy, jealousy, hatred, prejudice, intolerance, war, murderous intent. All of those things stem from a fear that we are indeed isolated in our life, or that we're going to lose something we want or have and not get something that we want. That's what fear comes from. It isolates us. It withdraws us into the low vibration of being alone in the world. And the flip side of that is love. Love is the creative power that God put this place here for us to experience, to journey back towards, to become an expression and a channel of. And when we experience that, the isolation that can often lead from fear dissipates. And we find joy and enthusiasm, as Dr. Dyer was talking about. I have a very practical definition of love because people have been taking stabs at it forever and ever. And a long time ago now, in the 70s, I believe, M. Scott Peck had a definition for love in The Road Less Traveled, which just stuck with me since I first read it, which is, it is the willingness to extend oneself for the spiritual growth of oneself or another. And I have been living with that as a practical definition of love, as a guiding light for how I am behaving in the world. Because to truly love, we need to be out of our little self. To be working towards expressing that greater light that is within each one of us, that feeling of unity. And it works in all areas of our life. And so does the flip side. So on a personal level, when we are experiencing fear, we are in that place where it seems dark and lonely. We react, oh, those people over there, look what they did. I got news for you, there's no they. Not in a unity of life. I invite you, as a little practice as you go through the week, and I'm going to scatter these throughout this little talk here, is go through the week, and as you find yourself saying he, they, them, anything that is other than me, my, and us, change the word. Bring it to say, oh, look what we did. It's a challenging thing to do, especially if what somebody else is doing doesn't really go well with your idea of what they should be doing. But just remember, they're part of one too. And we're all one ultimately. So when, on a personal level, we're contracted and constricted in this feeling of fear, everything seems difficult. This is my personal experience. You can relate to it if it relates to you, but I can't really know yet what you're thinking. But when I open my heart to that idea of I need to extend myself, to deepen into a spiritual practice, to reach out and help another person, to help them get through what they're getting, then all of a sudden my heart opens up and my mind changes. See, we really believe that. If you change your thinking, your life will change. So it starts with changing from a place of fear to a place of love and saying to myself, what would love do now? What is the next best thing that I can bring forward into this life to reach out and watch it change? And this works. It really works. I was in a situation earlier yesterday evening where there was a potential for something where I had been viewing it in a little bit of a positional attitude about what I wanted somebody else to do. And I thought, what would love do here? Love could, my personal objective was get out of my house. You guys can fill in the story. Instead of, and I've tried that before, I have stomped my foot and I have yelled and screamed and I have done all sorts of things about that didn't really work well and in fact created fear and isolation and hurt. And then I thought last night, well, let's not go down that road again. What would love do here? And I found myself opening up my heart and expressing my fear. And it felt really vulnerable. And it felt really difficult to say those words of, I don't know how to resolve this. To say those words of, I love here, but I don't know how to help. And all of a sudden I had this deep connection that went beyond my preconceptions of what that was going to come out with. And I watched somebody else open up from their fear and their isolation. And a beginning was made. So on a personal level, this comes forward as love expressing because it works. Fear is going to lead us into insoluble problems. But when we open our hearts, all things become possible. Until we open our hearts, they are beyond reach. So that leads right into relationships. First, we have a relationship with ourselves. When we're in that place of fear and we open ourselves up to love, we begin to say, okay, I can get out of my little fears and do something in a relationship, whether it's a family relationship, an intimate relationship, a relationship with a coworker. And those are the areas where we get into fear. I'm not going to get what I want, or I'm going to lose something I have. And when we take that and we move beyond those little fears, sometimes they're big fears. Let's not belittle that. Fear can be a very powerful motivator, and it works in all of our lives. But when we can move beyond that, when we ask for courage to do the next right thing, we can then bring that courage forward into a situation and face that from a loving perspective. And it's not easy. Love works, but it calls you to actions that may be uncomfortable, that may require you to stand in a truth that is going to rub a little wrong with some other people, or you might fear that it rubs a little wrong with some other people. I found myself in another one, it's been a week of these, which is why this talk is where it is. In another situation where I was looking at some things in my life that I felt I needed to change. And it impacts a lot of people. And I've come to no conclusions, but I was in so much fear and wrapped up in my head about what should I do with this? How should I make it right? How should I fix these things so that my life works better? And what I realized was I was approaching that from the isolated fear aspect rather than the love aspect, which was not to start by saying, how should I make this better, but to ask, what should I be in this situation? How can I be love in this situation? And what I found myself doing, welcome, come on in, have a seat. What I found myself doing was, instead of continuing to play in my head, to trust that love could make this work. In essence, that God could make this work. Because it seemed to be beyond me. And what I went to was, I opened myself up again and made myself vulnerable. And started to talk about all of the things that were not working for me with some people I really trust. And to talk about how I didn't know what to do. And there I found myself again asking, I don't know what to do. And the funny thing that happened in that conversation, it started in a place of desperation, and it moved through the desperation, through expressing my fears, through expressing that small self-attitude about what life was or could be, to a place where I started moving into this understanding of love, of extending myself for my own spiritual growth and for the spiritual growth of the people around me. And all of a sudden, I felt lighter. As if a burden were lifted, as if someone cared, as if I were connected, as if life were truly one. And the connection was made. And this is possible for each one of us, because at the essence, each one of us is the same. We are human beings having a human experience. And what that means is that we are spirits embodied. We are all the same spirit embodied in individual forms. This is the spark of life coming through each one of us, and we get past the fears with the courage to open up ourselves to a new experience, to a new understanding, to a new place of being. And then things become possible, and connections become possible. And then love continues to work. Love continues to work because then it starts to draw us forward. I have a new idea. I have a new connection. I don't feel isolated anymore. Now, what do I do with it? And so we start to seek community. And that love can express itself. Now, I don't know if anybody else has, I know a bunch of people here have actually volunteered on some of our endeavors, going out with the community and being part of things. And sometimes it's a little scary. We talked about a little bit before about going out to WHYY at some ungodly hour in the morning to get on the radio and take calls for their fund drive. And none of us had done this before. There's quite a bit of fear about, uh-oh, what do we do? You know, we got in there and, you know, we're listening and missing our cues because we've never done this before, but the radio people have. They're good at it. And it got really fun, you know, like by the end of the hour or 2 hours that we were on, you know, they do this on the radio. They say your name and everybody's supposed to cheer. So like we missed the first 3 of those. So we were having fun talking to each other. But then they'd say, and we have here today New Thought Philadelphia, yay! And we got into it. We opened up to the experience. And then the experience connected us with the entire Philadelphia region on the radio. It was fun. You know, life, but that's open. That's love drawing us into action, going beyond the fear of, oh, I don't know how to do this, to maybe I'll experience this and try this. You know, and then we look for people of like mind. This is a funny statement in New Thought. People of like mind. There's only one mind.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? The irony of that.
There's only one mind. Of course we're people of like mind. Even them. Oh wait, there isn't any them, is there? There's just us. See? Oh. So when we get comfortable in a community, we start to act in that community. We take that love forward into other people's lives. We look out for the spiritual well-being and growth of other individuals because we are able to. The channel becomes open. We become filled with enthusiasm. The God within leads us outward into giving of ourselves, into giving of the gifts that we have into the world. And yet fear can come back. And some days we get up and say, I just don't want to do that today. And this is where love can draw us as discipline. I made a commitment to do this. Let that commitment draw me past this feeling of not wanting to do that and see what happens. And bring ourselves to a greater expression of life once again. Because sometimes the road gets dusty. We can trudge along, and it can seem like the relief and the oasis are far, far away. And sometimes the only thing that keeps us moving is an idea that I have committed to something better. And sometimes that commitment to the idea comes through and strengthens us enough to take the next step. And the next step leads to the next step. And the next step leads to the oasis. And then we look back and say, oh, I couldn't have been here had I not walked that road. I couldn't have been in this place of understanding had I not felt what I had felt and brought forward what I wanted to bring forward into the world. And then there's a higher love that works even greater. It's when we can bring ourselves to act for the greater good. When we start to love so much that there is no longer a them or a they. And we look into the world and we say, it's us, and we're here, and we're on a journey from fear to love. And as we move loveward more and more, we could begin to understand the greater good. And that's where I started from when I said, sometimes it seems, how can we change the world? And the way we can change the world is to individually be love. Imagine a place in which every one of us was concerned for the spiritual growth and well-being of ourselves and another human being. Imagine where there was nobody who was left out from a connection of love and community. I think John Lennon wrote a song about that. Listen to it sometimes. You see, fear can immobilize us. It can immobilize us as individuals, it can immobilize us as communities, it can immobilize us as societies and as the human race. And we can be stumped by the difficulties that are out there because we go to fear rather than moving into a place of what would love do. That's the individual charge as well as our charge as human beings to care for one another. So I invite you to ask at whatever level you feel comfortable, because that's the other thing that comes about this. Not every one of us has to save the world. There will be people out there who can and do. Each one of us is given an individual aspect of this divine consciousness to bring that into being for ourselves to the best that we can do. And that's what we're here for, to be the best that we can do, to express love the best that we can in any given moment, to ask ourselves, what would love do now? And then have the courage to do that. And societies and the world can change that way. So I invite you as you go about your week to continue to ask, what would love do? And allow yourself to expand. Allow yourself to be vulnerable. Allow yourself to be courageous. And step up to the plate. We're all in this together. I love you.
Love you.